Metrobank are celebrating the power of cricket in shaping strong, confident and resilient women. Through their partnership with the ECB and as champions of women's and girls' cricket, they're empowering young girls and women to play cricket. They're helping them build leadership, teamwork and confidence, all while having fun. Because when women step onto the field, they're not just playing a game, they're building skills for life. To learn more about their initiatives, check out the link in the description. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. We've got a packed show for you today, as well as the usual cast. You'll hear from Chinelle Henry, the West Indies all-rounder who's taken the WPL by storm. We've also got Kate Cross on the show, talking about the PCA's Women's Impact Report and obviously also the Ashes. Elsewhere, Lauren, Katya and Ben talk about the 100 draft, the upcoming England A Tour to Australia, the WPL and more. First up, here's Lauren.
Lauren, it's been a busy week on the cricketing front. We've had the 100 draft, we've had England Women's A squads announced, the WPL is reaching its final stages. I felt all this week that we're really starting to build up to the run up to the season, or I did until I went for a run this morning and it was absolutely freezing. How's getting back into the action in the UK been for you this week?
Yeah, really good. I also went for a run this morning and I had my gloves on and my hat and everything. It's certainly not cricket weather yet. But yeah, really nice to be back. I haven't done any cricket this week, but I've been around the Yorkshire girls and in and amongst Headingley, which has been great to be back with everyone. I'll pick up a stick again next week and get going before we head to Abu Dhabi. But yeah, no, it's actually, everyone says, oh, about the weather. And I said, but it is actually really nice to be home. And yeah, it does. It feels like last weekend was quite warm. So it did feel like we're quite close to the season now. So let's hope it turns soon and fingers crossed we get some warmer weather.
Well, the biggest news this week was the 100 draft, which I'm sure you were following with your eyes peeled from an Invincibles standpoint. What did you make of the draft and who were the names who didn't get picked up that you were surprised by?
Yeah, I think Chinelle Henry is the biggest one for me. Obviously, we haven't seen Chinelle Henry feature in the 100 as yet. I thought Southern Brave were going to go for her over Chloe Tryon. You just look at how damaging she's been. I think with the bat more than anything, like that 6 and 7 role in women's cricket is a role that's not done that well by many players in the world. You know, and that's just fact. It's a really difficult place to bat, and to almost exclusively strike at 200 plus every time you go out to bat is very niche. You know, and not many players can do that. So I was quite surprised that she didn't get picked up. I guess the other one to note is Alyssa Healy. I can't imagine she would have taken that too lightly either. You know, I think obviously a world-class performer and a massive name in the women's game to not get picked up. You know, I know she's been unavailable at times, but yeah, to not get drafted, that's probably the two names I reckon that stand out the most for me.
It's interesting though, because if you look at the Healy versus Vole pick, because Georgia Vole was picked up in the 65k bracket, and you kind of think that's her being picked over Alyssa Healy in that same bracket as an Australia opener. And Georgia Vole's been hot over the last 6 months or so, and Chinelle Henry's also hot now. So you kind of see that players are getting picked up based on who's hot right now, but that's not kind of been the case with Chinelle Henry. Just from an Invincibles point of view, you signed Meg Lanning directly and then reselected Paige Schofield in the top salary bracket in the auction. That top 5 or 6 looks absolutely stacked.
Yeah, well, that's the hope. That's the plan. Yeah, like we were super fortunate to land Meg so cheap. Really, she was an absolute bargain, and she's going really good in the WPL as well. So she's still a world-class performer. But yeah, I think that was the thing we wanted. The drafts are so complicated, you know, trying to get a strategy that gives you movement on, you know, if they go there, where do we go? Where do we, you know, and that was the thing is if we could land Meg at 36, we had options going into the draft. And that's, you know, our intention was to always keep Paige Schofield. You know, there was absolutely no doubt about that. She was arguably our best player last year. But yeah, it looks, you know, obviously really disappointed to miss out on Maddie Villiers. Like she's been a key player, a key core member of our group for, you know, since the start. But but she wanted a fresh challenge. Sometimes you've been in the same place for 4 or 5 years. It's time to taste dip your toe in somewhere else. But yeah, it's one of those things where there's probably like 10 or 12 players that you want to keep every year, but reality is you can't keep them all. But yeah, we were really happy with how the draft went. We also got the other two who were top of our pick, in Phoebe Franklin and Katya Moore. So yeah, even outside of that top five, like it was a pretty good day. But I think, looking at all the squads, like this year, I reckon is going to be the absolute best comp we've had. You look at somebody like Welsh Fire, who have been really strong the last couple of years and not managed to win it. Like they've recruited so well with Katie Levick, Katie George. I think that bolsters their bowling attack brilliantly. Especially if you look at Savannah Gardens, like it's quite slow and low. So someone like Katie Levick will be really effective on that, sort of trying to create that home advantage. But honestly, like I look at our team and I think we look really strong. And then you look across all the other lists and you go, oh no, they look strong. They look strong. So I honestly think it's going to be the best one yet. I think the players that are available this year and that have been recruited are phenomenal.
Which teams do you think got the best bang for their buck in the auction? You mentioned Welsh Fire there, but which signings do you think were kind of the most value signings that were picked up?
I think Welsh Fire did well with Katie George and Katie Levick, definitely. I think we did really well with Meg Lanning. I think London Spirit did well with Georgia Redmayne. Like, she's an absolute steal. I know she's not the most destructive sort of, I was going to say T20, but like 100 ball player. But she was unbelievable for them last year. I'm trying to think, who else sort of. I thought Sophie Devine was a pretty good buy, really. It'll be interesting to see where she's a bit of a roll the dice, I think, just given that she's having a little bit of time out of the game. She might be fresh and absolutely raring to go, or she might be a little bit undercooked. It's hard to know with, taking a break from the game for sort of, I guess, mental health reasons, personal reasons. But I think she was a good buy because I think that's what the Southern Brave need. They need a decent all-rounder. Who else sort of stands out? Who stands out to you as a real good pick?
As real good pick, I think you've got most of the bases covered. I think as like a kind of pick who I was thinking, I don't know whether that's a big high. I was thinking potentially Emma Lamb is a pick that's gone in potentially slightly high. Emma Lamb's obviously a brilliant player, but she had a decent 100, I think, a couple of years ago, and then not so much since, and she hasn't played for England for a couple of years. And my point on Birmingham Phoenix's batting was they've got Elise Perry, they've obviously signed Georgia Voll and Emma Lamb, but beyond that, at the level kind of just below their marquee players, I think they're going to struggle for, like you said, that they rely on their big name picks quite a lot. That's where they're going to struggle. Thinking about those kind of below big name picks, how hard is it to select those domestic players at the kind of lower salary levels of which there's a big pool to choose from? Hundreds of players put their names forward for this draft.
Yeah, I think that's where your impact and your stats people become really important. Like I know we work really closely with the analyst at the Oval Invincibles, Mark. He pulls out basically, like generally your top five is sort of set, and then your top, I don't know, like 4 or 5 bowlers is set because they're your banker players that are your core that do a lot of the, I guess, heavy lifting of a performance. But those impact players that sort of bat 6, 7, or might be like your 5th or 6th bowler are so important because, it might be 5 or 10 deliveries at the back end, or it might be actually a game in which you're sort of 4 or 5 down and you're going against the tide a little bit, or bowlers are going around the park and you need some overs from somebody. So you want versatility. Like the thing we looked for is, so you look at like a Katya Moore, for example, can bowl in all 3 phases of the game. So you don't just want an off spinner. You want quite specific, like she can bowl in the power play, she can bowl at the death, she can bowl through the middle. So she gives you 3 parts of an innings. Phoebe Franklin is a bit similar. Like you just want people that can contribute in lots of areas. I think the fielding for those particular picks becomes really important. because they're not necessarily going to bowl loads of deliveries and they're not necessarily going to get huge opportunity with the bat, but they can win you a game in the field. You look at someone like Phoebe Franklin, like she can, she can give it a nudge with the bat. She scores in unusual areas, but she's a very, very good fielder and can bowl. So I think that's generally like what people go for. I think you look at a domestic player like Jodie Grucock and you think that she's gone for, she was obviously first pick for Trent Rockets and went for really good money. You've also got to have one eye on like, okay, well, if we can't just base this all around overseas all the time. Like you need to invest in the domestic players because, the teams with the domestic players generally are the most successful teams because all the overseas are much of a muchness. So there has to be, it's a bit similar to Grace Scrivens last year, is you're going to have to pay over the odds for somebody at some point with a view to then being like, well, you could retain her and she could be part of your plans for the next 4 or 5 years. Now, I know it's all about trying to win now, but also there is probably an element of that where I think Jodie Grucock's a great pickup for that reason because she's young, she offers with the ball, she's a good fielder, she offers with the bat, she's left-handed. So it's probably all the details below just an all-rounder. Even just the left-handed thing is quite a plus for, especially in like short format cricket, having those combinations.
Yeah, no, definitely. And just on the overseas players as well, this auction was so heavily influenced by there only being 4 overseas player spots available. There was a really good article on CricBuzz this week from Ayush Puthran, and it talked about the dominance of Australia players in overseas slots for franchise auctions, which is obviously kind of expected given how far ahead Australia's domestic system is ahead of the rest of the world. But we talk about franchise cricket a lot as helping the gap between countries who are still developing their professionalism and countries who have already developed their professionalism. And outside of those Australia spots, the franchise overseas spots tend to be shared around the same players. So your Deandra Dottins and your Hayley Matthews and your Marizanne Capps and Sophie Devines and all that, without other places available for some of the best players in the world. So we saw Chamari Patu and another mention for Chinelle Henry getting passed over in this auction. Is the dominance of Australia talent across the franchise circuit actually making it harder for other teams to level up, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And I think this, there's sometimes a bit of I guess like a familiarity bias where a lot of players know what a lot of the Aussies are like in an environment. It's sort of those things where you go for familiar because it's like, oh yeah, you know how they contribute to a team environment, you know what you're getting. Taking a punt on somebody who's not played in those conditions in the tournament before is almost seen like a bit more of a risk. So I think there's probably a little bit of an element of that is as well as you go for who you know in terms of like character checks, how much have they played it? Like a lot of the Aussie players have obviously played in England. Given the Ashes, the experiences there. If you do well in an Ashes, they're good in these conditions. I think sometimes it's there's almost that familiarity, and I think the other bit is like you saw with Chinelle Henry getting picked up in the WPL, is they're almost like what teams have toured the country in recent times. So like Chinelle Henry got picked up because she'd played and dominated against India in that series before. So given that we've just played an Ashes and then the draft and the Big Bash, I think that tends to lend itself to, it's almost that like what's in your present mind, isn't it? And familiar. And I think, just the nature of how frequently we see Australian players featuring in things almost creates a bit of a bias towards that. I totally forgot about Chamari Atapatu as well, not getting picked up and Chinelle, like I say, and Chinelle Henry. So they're probably examples where Chinelle Henry is probably a little bit more surprising than Chamari Atapatu, given that Atapatu didn't play in the WPL. She then went to play with Sri Lanka. She had an average Big Bash from a very good Big Bash the year before, whereas Chinelle Henry in recent times has dominated. So she was more of a surprise for me.
Yeah, on Atapatu, she's actually just absolutely trounced New Zealand overnight. That was Sri Lanka's first win in a T20I in New Zealand, I think. And Sri Lanka actually have won 4 out of their last 8 matches across formats for New Zealand, which is against New Zealand, which is interesting. But I'd highly recommend everyone reading that Crick Buzz article. It's very interesting. Moving on, we also had England A squads announced this week. Headlines from there were Paige Schofield's in all 3 squads, all of the bowlers on the pace development programme are in, as well as Alice Capsey and Danny Gibson, who will join after they finish in the WPL. Mahika Gore is also going. Any surprise omissions from the squad from your point of view, or anyone you're pleased to see included?
Surprises, not really any huge surprises, really. I think generally they're the players who have done really well in domestic cricket. Maybe Alice Davison-Richards missing out. You know, she's somebody that's done really well in domestic cricket, but not made the list. Obviously played for England and played a lot for England A. I guess you look at somebody like Emma Lamb, who sort of seems to have dropped further and further behind the pecking order. But yeah, in terms of any surprises, not really. I think it's really what is a huge positive is to see Capsey and Gibbo, you know, going on that trip, because I think there's a lot of cricket to be played for those girls. You know, they've been in and out of teams. Danny Gibson especially hasn't had a lot of game time of late, so I think they're really good inclusions. I guess the other one is like Georgia Adams, who's generally been on lots of A tours and in and around the sort of system. But yeah, there's nobody that's hugely mind-blowingly sort of not expected or expected to be there, but it looks a good squad to me.
On the Capsey and the Gibson inclusion, do you think they could have picked any more of the kind of England core or ones on the periphery that could have gone out to Australia?
Well, Freya Kemp's included. I think she's probably another one that's arguably just light on a bit of game time, really. Obviously, Mahika Gore being included and being around, you know, she struggled with injuries, but we all know how good she is. I'm trying to sort of think of, I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised either way if like a Maya Boucher was on it. I know she's had a pretty good time of it of late, besides the sort of the World Cup and the Ashes. But I sometimes think, you know, the more experiences and the more good teams you can play against, the better you'll get. Because I think with Bouche we've seen the best of her, but we've probably then seen the other side in the Ashes, and when she's toured in Australia, she struggled a lot in the WBBL for the Melbourne Stars. So it's just giving exposure to Aussie conditions, which are obviously different. Yeah, so she was one that I thought could have gone, but equally we have seen enough of what she can do in an England shirt.
Yeah, and Australia's a long trip for 2 trips in a winter, as you would know. I was trying to think what would be a good outcome for this tour besides results. It doesn't really feel like a second 11 that's been selected. It feels like a proper development squad. But if they get panned, then all the headlines or the coverage will again be England thumped again in Australia. What will other John Lewis, who is head of the England A's, be hoping to gain from this tour, do you think?
I think big contributions. I think people with the desire and the hunger to put their hand up and say, I want an England shirt and I'm close and I'm knocking on the door. I'd love to see, you know, your Capsies, your Freya Kemps, your Danny Gibsons really affirm where they're at in terms of, you know, I guess they're the experienced heads on that trip from an international point of view. So I'd love them to really sort of own that space and put in some big performances that almost goes, well, look, we are absolutely international cricketers, and put some solid performances in. But I guess it's just unearthing. You know, you look at someone like Emma Jones, who's very unknown, bowls decent pace and can give it a whack. But it's learning about what's out there and what's on the radar for England that can keep players who are currently in possession of those spots in the team on their toes or very, very much close to being able to break in.
Lastly, we've had the WPL Eliminator, which happened yesterday, and the final will be taking place this weekend. Mumbai Indians absolutely trounced Gujarat by 47 runs in the Eliminator. They put on 213 for 4. Nat Sciver-Brunt and Hayley Matthews both scored 77. Sciver-Brunt's was off just 41 balls. Sciver-Brunt's WPL with the bat is really worth outlining here. It's been crazy. For the whole group stage, her and Elise Perry have kind of been trading places at the top, but Sciver-Brunt's now kind of just completely taken off at the top. She scored, going into the final, 493 runs at an average of 70, with 5 half centuries and a strike rate of 150, which is crazy. But it has been a high scoring tournament this year, and I think every side bar Delhi has passed 200 at least once in this tournament. Do you think splitting up between more venues this year has kind of helped those bigger scores develop?
Yeah, I think so. I think obviously in India, the used pitches, it generally turns and keeps low. So you get, as you progress, if you have 3 games on the same surface, which they've done in previous years, what you get game 1 and what you get game 3 is very different. I think the boundary sizes are tiny over there. The scores are very much a reflection of that, but there's no taken away from the way in which a lot of the players have played, particularly the batters. Yeah, like Nat, I'm watching some of her innings and she just looks like she's just playing with unbelievable freedom. It's almost like she's playing a computer game where it's like, okay, that's the 5th gap with the fielder. Right, I'll hit it there. Okay, they've moved. Right, I'll hit it there. And she just looks like she's at the absolute peak of her powers again. And I think, good surfaces, fresh pitches, small boundaries certainly encourages that entertaining brand of cricket. But it's also very highly skilled. And, you still got to make good decisions for long periods of time. You can't get to 40 and then spoon one, to be scoring the amount of runs that she has. And the way in which she's done it is like she's absolutely, back to her best. I would be interested to know, just the mindset of what she feels like right now versus, how she sort of found the Ashes and the differences in, franchise cricket and international cricket. Or is it just a case of the bowling's maybe not quite as good? There's a lot of drop catches from local players. Like I think there was 12 drop catches yesterday. Or if it is a shift of, like a bit more playing with a bit more freedom, and sort of taking the game on, and like it certainly looks like she's making moves earlier.
Well, the final for that tournament is going to take place this weekend. What are your predictions? It will be Mumbai Indians versus Delhi Capitals.
Well, I was walking the dog yesterday and Courtney, my wife, has said from the start Mumbai are going to win this year. So she's the boss, so we'll say Mumbai is going to win. But no, I don't know. I just sometimes think Delhi have sort of been sat waiting for this final again. And it's, 3 in a row where they've gone straight to the final. Whereas Mumbai sometimes playing that eliminator and obviously playing the way they did, I just feel like Mumbai have got that little bit of momentum. But yeah, I think there's always a fair bit on the toss as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I think Mumbai look particularly good at the minute.
Well, I also agree with Courtney. I think Mumbai Indians are odds on for the final. I also think Mumbai I think they'll have played something like 4 games in 6 days going into the final. And I guess having that momentum, even though you're tired, does kind of help you in that regard as well.
Yeah, you just find a way at that stage in the comp. It's almost sometimes the tiredness helps you because you've got like less time to overthink things. You just got to get in the contest and get in the midst of it.
Well, that final will take place this weekend, and I'm sure we'll talk about it on next week's show. Thanks, Lauren, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, mate.
So on the WPL, me, Katya and Ben are recording this as the eliminator between Gujarat and Mumbai is happening. We talked a lot about Gujarat on last week's show. Their run to the playoffs has been one of the stories of the competition. But on the flip side, Katya, RCB not making the top 3 is quite a big story, having won the competition last year. What's gone wrong there?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to work out because I think it was that they won they've won one less match this time on their run into the like end of the group stages than they did last year, yet they've not qualified this year. And I think there is something in that it's just been a closer competition this year, but equally RCB have had both some unlucky moments, and also that some of their star players this year didn't really perform the same way they did last year. So Smriti Mandana, for example, was really, really good last year, and she's been kind of okay this year, like kind of passable, but not a standout season. They've obviously had Elise Perry, who's had an absolutely ridiculous season, and Risha Ghosh has also done well for them. But I think the most difficult thing they've had to deal with is they had their three best bowlers from last year. So they had Shreyanka Patil, Asha Sabana and Sophie Molyneux, who were the three top wicket takers in last year's competition, were all ruled out before the competition started this year. And that's to deal with that like a week or so out from the tournament is a ridiculous thing to have to deal with. And Georgia Wareham is kind of the only spinner that's been consistently really, really good for them. Like Yas Rana's done well, but she's only played, I think, 5 or 6 out of their games. So they haven't had that kind of trio spin attack that they had to rely on last year, and they've had to rely on Wareham and also Renu Kataka as probably the best T20 seamer in the world, you'd say. So that's been an issue. And then they've had the ability to score a lot of runs. So we saw in their last group game against Mumbai, they scored 199, and then they also put over 200 in a losing cause past UP Warriors. That hasn't been backed up with the ball, but it's also just been kind of sporadic as to when they've been able to do that. They also lost I think all 4 tosses in the home leg of their of the competition. So in the Bengaluru leg of the competition, which meant they were batting on the wrong side of it, if you like. So there's just kind of been a lot of bitty stuff that's not come together. They lost twice to UP Warriors, who finished last in the group stage. So they weren't beating UP, who they were meant to beat. So then that made their life harder against other teams, and it's just kind of not clicked together. They also lost some crucial moments. So they lost the super over to UP that they really should have won. I think they had them 134 for 8 in a chase of 180, so they should have won that game outright. And then they had UP put 225 past them, and they still lost even though they scored 212 in the chase. So it's just kind of not quite come together. If they can get those 3 bowlers or similar back next year, you can see how the core of their side is really, really good. But this year it's just kind of not come together.
Yeah, the margins can be really small in these competitions. We'll get onto the 100 later, but we're talking about how good were London Spirit last year when they won the competition. Arguably, they were very lucky to get to the playoffs. It's been quite cool, even though they haven't got to the playoff, just seeing Perry and Siva trading places at the top of the run scoring list. Next up, one of the stories of the competition has been the emergence at this level of Chinelle Henry. The West Indies all-rounder has been around in international cricket for a while, but her game has gone to another level with the bat in particular over the last 6 months. So at the time of recording, she's the 3rd highest 6-hitter in the WPL with 15, only Shafali Verma and Ash Gardner ahead of her on the list, and her strike rate in the tournament is 196, and given that she's averaging nearly 30 with the bat as well, is some going. She's the highest. She's got the highest strike rate of any regular batter in the competition. How's she done it? Well, Katya spoke to her last week to find out.
Thank you so much for joining the show today. How's life out in India at the minute?
It's been good, little of everything here and there, traveling, experiencing the culture. It's been great.
And you're playing for UP Warriors, coming in as an injury replacement for Alyssa Healy. How did that come
That's
about?
great. Honestly, I have no idea. I just know that I was home minding my business, going through my rehab. And the next thing I know, I'm being called, I'm being texted, I'm being searched for. A lot of people texting me, people are looking for you. And I'm just like, what do you mean people are looking for me? And there was this guy who reached out to my kit sponsor, and then there was another guy, and I'm just like, wait, I'm not lost. Like, I'm right here, but I had no idea what happened. I guess it was just between 2 teams, RCB and UP, and I ended up coming here in replacement of Alice Healy, and I mean, life to the WPL has been good so far, and I'm just enjoying it.
And you're filling a kind of a different role than the one Alyssa would have done, obviously as a wicketkeeper, batter, and a captain. How is it? Has that kind of helped with the pressure of coming in for your first tournament that you're not a like for like replacement?
I mean, yeah, because then that will naturally, batting where I normally bat, bowling, doing the things. So that was kind of like a relief in terms of, obviously I replace Alyssa Healy, but we don't do the same thing. And if I'm going to fit into this team, it's going to be basically, just the role that I'm used to playing for every team that I've been in. So it was quite, easy to fit in. It was quite easy to, grasp the concept of what's expected of me. Because if I had to open, God knows, I have no idea because I've never actually done that in my career. But to come in and fit in exactly into the order that I would fit into any team back home has been a relief, and it has been good so far, and it has been working.
And you obviously coming in as an injury replacement, did you expect to play as much as you have?
I didn't because I'm coming here with people who have been here before me. This is my first time. The first game I didn't play, and then to come in and play the second game, and then all the other games after that, and trying to help this team as much as I did, and then I'm just like playing. Obviously, probably one or two games, but I had. It was never at the back of my mind that I was going to be playing this much, especially as an injury replacement player. So, I mean, to be given the opportunity and actually taking the opportunities, as to why I was brought here has actually been good, and that's just something I want to continue to do. And we have three crucial games to go. Obviously, if I'm a part of the playing 11, I just want to continue to do what I've been doing to help the team, and also my career in terms of leagues around the world and stuff like that. Because in order to make the playoff, we're definitely gonna have to win our next game. So I guess the focus is just on that. Whether I play or not is just about helping the team the best way I can.
And you've taken 2 wickets in 4 games across the tournament so far, but where you've really left your mark is as a lower order power hitter. The 2 games against Delhi in particularly, 62 runs off 23 balls in the second one of those matches, which equalled the record for the fastest 50 in the WPL history. Where does that come from?
I've been asked this question a lot, over the past couple of days, and I guess the answer is just, having that confidence of, especially the head coach to begin with, the trust in terms of playing the role well, because obviously I've played against him, in England team and a couple of the other players, across my West Indies career, so he would have known, the ability that I have, the skill set that I have, and to have that trust just coming in as an injury replacement and just been given that freedom to play the role that I've been doing, over the course of my career without hesitation. It doesn't matter the pressure, it doesn't matter the situation. My role is never going to change. It's just about, trying to finish an innings as best as I can for this team. And, those 2 games in particular, I managed to, help the team get to a total that we could, actually defend or try to defend. And to actually have, other overseas players in this team helping and even helping the local players has been really good. And, having joined them in the middle, having, learning from them throughout this series, the one thing that never changes is that everybody just tells me, we know what you can do, we know the damage you can do. Is just about backing yourself, doesn't change, backing your skills. And obviously bowlers are going to work it out one way or another. If they do, if they don't, it's just about me, adapting to bowlers, adapting to playing conditions. And regardless, as I said, regardless of whatever situation the team is, my role is not going to change.
You say your role isn't going to change, and I think you're talking about UP Warriors head coach John Lewis there. Were there discussions after that innings, maybe, move me up the order a little bit?
Obviously everybody was, a bit like, what just happened? Because, walking in at your team at 80 something for 5 with 14 overs, and then you have 6 overs to go, and then the team ended up at 177, was just like, that was really good. And, the conversation around that was just like, continue to back your skills. Like, this was good, but it's just the beginning of the tournament. Obviously, we enjoyed the victory, we enjoyed the performance for that day, but at the end of the day, we know we had, other games, because obviously we started the tournament with 2 losses, and we know the job we have to do in catching up in terms of making a playoff spot. And yes, we have fun. Yes, we have, and the one thing he always says that he likes relaxed but not sloppy. So you can enjoy it, you can do that. But once it's time to get back to, cricket, once it's time to get back to playing, we start from scratch. Like, it doesn't matter what you did in the game before or 2 games before, we're all starting from scratch. So it's about trying to repeat that over and over again, helping yourself, helping the team, and that's just basically the conversations we keep having daily, whether it's in training, whether it's, on match games and match days. And that's the conversation he just keeps having. Yes, the role doesn't change. Yes, much things doesn't change, but just always remember you're starting from scratch, and people might be looking, people might be studying, but it's just about adapting to every situation and every bowler and just continue to do what you do.
But I think it's fair to say that up until last year, your international record with the bat didn't completely match up to the kind of runs you've been able to score in India, apart from a one-day series in India late last year where you scored quite a lot of runs. What changed from your perspective? How have you unlocked this kind of six hitting madness?
I mean, it's something that has been a part of my career over the years, and obviously people, commentators, outside watchers, family, friends, they've seen the ability. And the one question that has been thrown out to me is like, we've seen this ability, but we actually can't see the stats to match up to said ability. you know I've done a lot of behind the scene work with coaches, whether it's being the West Indies setup or back home. I guess it was just about having that confidence that the skill set that I possess, it just doesn't need much. Is just about you being comfortable, you being confident in terms of executing the skills. So of course a lot of training has been put into it, as I said, over the past probably 12 1.5 year, over the past 1.5 year leading up to this moment. A lot of work has been put in behind the scenes. I have spent a lot of off time when we don't have games, when we don't have camps, when we don't have tours, just working on the skill, also bowling wise, because obviously when you're an all-rounder, you tend to pay one closer look to one, and then one kind of like fall off. And I think that series two leading up to the World Cup where we played Sri Lanka and we lost, and we knew that we had to go to the qualifiers, and a part of me, felt responsible for the team, losing, some of those games, because obviously at that time the responsibility, my batting role was, became a bit more zoned in on in the team, and was being able to help. And it mentally, it took a lot, and I had to do a lot of, as I said, a lot of work behind the scenes with that part mentally. And I guess leading up to the World Cup, it was just about getting myself right, getting the mind right. And I remember having a conversation with Shane, that's our head coach back home, and I remember having a conversation with him after that Sri Lanka series, and I was like, we had a camp, and I was like, yeah, I don't think I'm in the mental space to go to that camp. Like, I after this that I just had against Sri Lanka, I cannot, like, it's just not in me to go. And I remember he was like, yeah, get help. We need you for the World Cup. Get help. And I remember I didn't go to that camp, and days I've been having mental skill sessions, days I haven't gone to training, days I'm just trying to figure out, why am I not producing the way that I know how I could. And that took a lot, of help behind the scenes mentally. And I can remember just before World Cup, I started feeling better again. When we went to World Cup, we had camps, and I had the conversation with him, and I was like, yeah, I think I'm ready to go. And I'm really ready. Like, I haven't had a training sessions, but I think I'm ready to go. And I remember in that practice game against India, when I scored, a half century, and he was like, "You've been training." I was like, "Yeah, no. I think I just needed a break to go back to, you know, the visualization, watching how I play, tweaking a few stuff technically." And it was just about, all I did in my backyard for probably 2 weeks leading up to the World Cup was just hit a ball tied to a tree, just hitting it. And I think that kind of like just helped me in terms of remembering, how it feels again to play cricket when I was probably younger, just enjoying it. And one of the reporters just asked me, why am I always smiling? And then and I remember I was like, that's when I'm at my best. That helps me to relax. That helps me to remember that little girl that's always having fun, just playing cricket, doing her best. And I think that has brought out probably the best in me over the past year, and that's just something that I want to continue to do. And the six hitting has just become a lot easier now, because I have a more confidence in skills, and obviously SNC sessions have helped with that. But the skill set has come a bit more easier now, more than before, now that I've had a lot of time to think about it, watch it, do it over again. So that's all I've been doing over the past 2 years, and it's been working. And if that could continue to go my way, then I'm pretty sure I'll be involved in a lot more leagues around the world and help West Indies cricket go a lot further.
Speaking about getting back to cricket when you were younger and when you first started, what was your journey into cricket like when you were younger?
I actually did not like cricket when I was younger. I mean, that probably be weird. I was doing everything when I was younger, to be honest. But my main thing was track and field because obviously, in Jamaica, we're known for running and all of that stuff. So my main thing was track and field. And then one day, I just went to a cricket game and I was just running around, feeling balls because obviously I was a track athlete, so I was quick across the ground. I was doing everything, and for some reason, I could catch a cricket ball. I don't know how because I've never played cricket. And then at 13, my former coach back then was like, "Yeah, I need you to come to the Jamaica trials. Like, we're having the trials. I need you to come." And then I went to the trials, made the team at 13, and I guess I just never looked back then. Back then, I had the opportunity of playing with men and boys, so it kind of like shaped, my career a bit in terms of skill wise, the speed at which people bowl at me, getting tough, stuff like that. So I had the privilege of playing with only boys growing up because back then there wasn't female cricket when I started, or a lot of it, I should say. So the only choice was to play with boys, and I think that's where it kind of started for me. So I had a lot more information back then, had a lot more understanding of the game. So it just kind of then I just dropped everything because I was pretty good at it. So just dropped everything and then just started focusing more on cricket. And I guess back in 2018 when I made that World Cup squad in the Caribbean, it was just no looking back from then. I just made a promise that this was going to be my career and this I'm going to spend time to actually make it the best that I can. And at 29, finally starting to see results. I mean, it took a while, but I'm actually happy. There's still a lot of work to do, but the things that I've been able to do over the past year and a half, I'm quite happy with that.
There's a lot of West Indies cricketers who come from track and field backgrounds. Speaking about that, there it reminded me of Deandra Dottin. She was a javelin thrower, right?
Yeah, yeah, she was.
Before, there was very little pressure on you when you came out to bat, and now crowds and viewers go mad when you come out to bat. Does that do you thrive in that environment?
I think I do. I mean, the support, the constant, I get a lot of texts, I get a lot of Instagram DMs, I get a lot of stuff, since that inning that I played the other day, every time I walk out the field, people are like, yeah, they basically just came to the game to watch me play. So that gives me a more, confidence, more thrill, more like, yeah, I have a lot more fans now to, I guess, entertain and also while doing well for the team. And I think like I said, when I'm having fun, when I'm smiling, when I'm enjoying what I do, is when I'm at my best. And is it started really well in this competition. And as I said, we have 3 more games to go. And if I can continue to entertain, continue to help the team, continue to enjoy myself while, making progress and winning, then that's definitely something I'm looking forward to doing.
And who are your heroes that you look up to from West Indies cricket? There's so many I can think of like that have done similar things to you have.
I think this follow one of my fellow countrymen, and I think I have a lot of similarities to how we play, and that goes down to Dre Russ. I spend a lot of time watching how easy it is for him to just hit a six or the strike rate, and I think that's something that I constantly work on, whether it's T20 or 50 over cricket. And I've had a couple conversations with him before, and when I see him bat, when I see him bowl, and when I see him across the field, the athleticism, I'm like, wait, yeah, that's definitely me, and it to be that person, especially batting at the lower order too. And I'm like, yeah, we have everything in common. Like we do the same job, just different teams. So that he's definitely somebody that, I always watch, somebody that I always, look up to. And obviously my game kind of resemble his. So that's just basically it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining the show today, Chinelle, and good luck for the rest of the tournament.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me.
Ben, the 100 draft took place on Wednesday. You followed it very closely. There were only 4 overseas spots up for grabs. Those went to Georgia Volt, who went for 65k at the Phoenix. Deandra Dottin joined the Originals, and Southern Brave picked up Sophie Devine and Chloe Tryon. From an English point of view, Heather Knight, Sophia Dunkley and Paige Schofield all picked up £65,000 deals. Before we get into the ins and outs of exactly what happened, do you want to just talk through draft dynamics a little bit? Because there were some really big name players who weren't picked up. Alyssa Healy, for example. Chinelle Henry didn't get picked up despite her recent form.
Yeah, well, I guess that those are two slightly different cases, I suppose. Healy was in some ways almost in competition with Vol for one spot in a way. And, Healy is obviously, she's, an Australia legend, captains Australia. But you also had during the winter this strange situation where Healy was injured, and so Vol was getting into the side and was, putting on, a breakout season in international cricket really against India. And then Healy was sort of getting back to fitness and then displacing her, but then Vol was back in for the test match. And actually you were looking at, obviously Vol seems like she's the next generation, but is she already better than Healy? And you can say that, based on what they've gone for the Phoenix in the draft, that maybe they see it as being the case. I guess as also with Healy, she is just injured a bit more often now. And I think one of the things actually with...
And the Phoenix have...
they have lots of keepers as well, so they didn't need that side of things. I think one of the things that's specific to the hundreds draft dynamics is that you have 3 overseas spots per squad and per team. So if you're picking an overseas player, you kind of need them to be an absolute banker. You can't pick you can't take a punt there so much. And I think that works against someone like Healy, who you might have to miss a game or two through injury possibly. But also it works against someone like Chinelle Henry, who, looks amazing at the moment, is in, the form of her life, but it is also quite a new upgrade that she's had to her game. And you don't want to get someone in who loses that form. And then all of a sudden it's, you're only playing 2 overseas players basically because one of them is not good enough to get into the starting 11. I suppose the other thing with draft dynamics that was interesting was just how Birmingham Phoenix very quickly just burned through a lot of the other team's right to match cards. I think their first 3 picks were, I think it was Schofield, Dunkley and Knight, all of whom were then right to matched. And then they went for Georgia Vol, so they actually then went for an overseas player. And I think given the game way that they'd never really intended to pick any of those players up, they just knew that their original teams were going to go and pick them back up at the highest price.
Well, also from a competitive point of view, if they picked up one of the domestic players, then they would have an extra overseas slot later down the pecking order.
That is true. Possibly they were thinking like, well, maybe if they forget to press the right to match button, then good for us. But I think they were just, and as they well should, were just making sure that they didn't have the option lower down, basically.
Katya, who do you think had a good day at the draft?
I think potentially Welsh Fire had a good day at the draft. Welsh Fire were obviously top of the league last year, and they picked up Katie George and Katie Levick in the draft, and I think those are 2 pretty good signings for them. I had to be actually reminded of why they were good last year, because it just feels so long ago. But Hayley Matthews had a really good season for them last year, and she's back again for them, and she's having is she still in the WPL eliminator? I think she is. Obviously, Hayley Matthews will be good again. And then they also had Jess Jonathan, who was really good last year, and Georgia Davis had a really good season last year. So all of them are back, and they've got their banker batters in Tammy Beaumont and Sophia Dunkley. So if you put them with Jonathan and Matthews, that's a really, really strong top 4. They've also got Sarah Bryce in the middle order, Georgia Elwish. They've still got Shabnam Ismail, and then with George and Levick, that really rounds out their bowling attack. So I think those are 2 really good picks, and Welsh Fire should be pretty strong again.
Yeah, I think Welsh Fire, I think Yas might ask us this later, but they're my picks for the tournament at this stage. It just felt...
It's bold call going for the team that finished top last year.
Well, yeah, sure. But also the thing was, I think they finished top last year. I mean, Cash right to pick up those players, but it just felt so repeatable. Like they had, I think, 5 batters who, made maybe over 200 runs, or at least were standing out. But all were just doing a job at different times, and also like 5 bowlers that were doing well. And Jonathan and Matthews were 2 of those. So they actually were able to basically have Georgia Elwish in the side not doing anything pretty much, which is a pretty good luxury to have. And now they have just more options for that player who can kind of round out the 11. As Cash says, you've got Levick in there if you want some leg spin, you've got George in there if you want some pace. It's a pretty handy combination.
I think they've got 2 of the most almost underrated players on the circuit in the bowling attack. One in Katie Levick, who's, if you're looking at players, and we'll come on to this later, but if you're looking for players who are not involved regularly with England, who do well in the 100, there aren't that many England qualified players who fit that bill, especially players who've done that for several years in the bounce. And Levick is 100% one of them. She had an excellent 100 in 2024. The other one, I feel like is almost completely forgotten in English cricket at the moment. It's Freya Davies, who I remember when she first came on into the England scene, she was regarded as someone who'd be a slightly better T20 bowler than a 50-over bowler. She's not really in the conversation anymore. I guess she's been just usurped by Lauren Bell in the pecking order, but she's a seriously good seamer, brilliant arsenal of variation. So yeah, I agree. Welsh Fire look very good. You two were talking before we started recording about how London Spirit, though they won it last year, you fear for them a little bit. Maybe not fear for them, but they're maybe not as strong on paper as people might assume for the defending champions. Yeah,
this was my hot take before we started recording, and I think if you look back at what their success was based on last year, again, I'm sometimes trying to look for repeatability of what a side did well, basically. And first of all, you look at last year, that they kind of squeezed into the playoffs, which is always, you can always look at that a bit like RCB did last season, I suppose, when we're talking about the WPL.
But also they properly squeezed in. So there was a game they tied against Oval, which they really should have lost. It was a pretty spectacular collapse from Oval at the end. And only because that game was tied did they qualify for the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then that was even given that Deepti Sharma had, an absolutely outstanding tournament. That was also leading off the back of Deepti having had a brilliant WPL. She had a less good WPL this side. I think that was just a brief sort of peak for her, and you'd be surprised if she had that same impact this time around. Similarly, you then had Georgia Redmayne, who is, a decent overseas player, but she's the lowest paid overseas player in the whole competition. Putting on standout knocks in the semi-final and the final. It would be a surprise if she put on that kind of show at the latter stages again. And then they've made the decision to go with Grace Harris over Meg Lanning. I don't think in and of itself that's a bad decision. I think Grace Harris is a brilliant T20 player. Meg Lanning was not actually a standout player for them last season. But you then just do still look at those. Grace Harris is a bit like she'll win you 2 games by herself, but maybe she's not going to be the player who is, top of the order, getting you, half century every time to ensure you get up to those totals. And actually looking down that London Spirit lineup, I'm not sure who it is that is ensuring that they're getting, just that volume of runs you need to be in contention at the business end of the tournament, looking down it basically.
Really good bowling attack though. Sarah Glenn, Danny Gibson, Charlie Dean, Deepti Sharma, Izzy Wong as well, Tara Norris as well. So yeah, you've got lots of options with the ball, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess it'd be interesting. Eva Gray was a standout last season, and if she can sort of maintain that level and show that just is her level, then that is something that makes that bowling attack look pretty fierce. But that would be a question that she has to show now, I guess.
Katya, any teams or players you thought were teams who look good, or players who you think were particularly good signings, particularly given the price bracket they were?
Well, I've got a team that I think are one of the strongest, along with Welsh Fire, and then I've also got a hot take on who I think are going to struggle potentially.
Cool.
I think, despite that they signed Georgia Vol and that they've got Elise Perry, I think Birmingham Phoenix might struggle a bit, and that's mainly because of their bowlers. I think their spin attack is quite reliant on Hannah Baker and Charis Pavley, and I think they're going to struggle. I also think if you look at their top order, yes, they've got Vol and they've got Elise Perry, but they're also going to be relying on Steer Callis, Emma Lamb and Amy Jones, who are all really good players, but pound for pound against some of the batting lineups in the other teams. Like if you look at Oval, you've got Lauren, Meg Lanning, Alice Capsey, Marizanne Kapp, Paige Schofield, all in your top 5. That lineup in Birmingham doesn't quite match up to some of those kind of power lineups. And I think if you combine that with the reliance they've got on those 2 fairly young spinners, I think they're going to struggle a little bit. And they finished second from bottom from the league last year.
Yeah.
And perhaps I don't know if this is an even hotter take, but I'm backing Southern Brave to go from bottom of the table to near the top of the table again. And if you look at what happened last year, it feels like potentially that was just a blip that happened last year. They've been so strong in all the other editions of the tournament. And when you look at their batting lineup, the only issue I can potentially see with it is how they fit them all in. So they've got Laura Wolf out this year, who was at Manchester last year, and she did really well at the originals last year. They've got the bankers in Danny Wyatt-Hodge, Maya Bouchier, Georgia Adams. They also picked up Sophie Devine in the auction. So that's a hell of a top 5, even before you get to Freya Kemp, Chloe Tryon. They've also got Maddie Villiers and Tilly Courtine-Coleman, who's a really promising left-arm spinner who we talked about during the Under-19 World Cup. Perhaps they're slightly vulnerable in the seam department. They've still got Lauren Bell, and they picked up Phoebe Graham in the auction, so that might be where their weakness is. Yeah. But other than that, they look really, really strong again, kind of on a pound-for-pound basis.
Yeah, I think Maddie Villiers, she's one of my picks for one of the best value buys of the draft. I mean, you sometimes look at her and think like, what is she adding in some ways? But then I think there is also a reason why she was pretty much ever present for Oval Invincibles through their dominance in the early years of the competition, where, you know, she'll bowl sort of maybe slightly ugly overs, but she gives you a bit of sort of flexibility in the attack. If you have someone doing that, she can wield a bat, even though she hasn't shown that in the 100 at the moment. Sometimes just having that someone who sits in there, and also she's just an outstanding fielder. And I think that actually, given that with there being so many all-rounders across this competition, you can have a player who's kind of sometimes in the side not doing much. If they are actually about adding value there, that can be a really big thing. And then on the other side of things, we talked about, Katya mentioned Emma Lamb there. It's a really big season for her, having been, you know, played for England but a little while ago, had a decent first 2 seasons of the 100, not done much in the last 2 years. She's in a really high price bracket. Actually, if you're looking across in that top 4 bands, so the 265k and the 250k brackets, there's only 3 players there who aren't either England regulars right now or an overseas signing, and it's her and then Paige Schofield and Lauren Winfield-Hill who have shown, you know, in the 100 why they deserve those slots. And Emma Lamb is not yet shown that, I guess, and she's also, you know, she's not in these England A squads that they've just announced today. So this is kind of a big chance where they put a lot of faith in her to show that she can be that caliber of player again.
Yeah, auction dynamics at play as well in her selection. Given that Vol, Schofield, Dunkley and Knight had all been picked up at that point, and Birmingham Felix needed batting, she was the most established batter available at that point. So yeah, I actually had a gripe around the pay. It's too rigid for me. Georgia Redmayne was the player of the match in both playoff games last year, the eliminator and the final. She is on £20,000. There are players who have not played a single game in the 100 who are on £36,000. To me, it's basically bollocks. You know, it's not based on performance, and I think draft dynamics have way too much sway, and it's significant because. And we'll get to the increases in women's cricket pay later in the show, and there have been amazing advances, but overall there's not a huge amount of money. So the 100 has, compared to the men's game, a disproportionate influence in terms of how much money people are paid. And I just don't think it's done on performance. In a lot of cases it is, but I think some players at both ends of the spectrum, I think some players are very fortunate to have deals as good as they have, but equally I think there are other players who have been really good for a few years who are sort of stuck. Obviously, they can take a punt in the auction dynamic. But I guess, again, something that we'll probably talk about more in the next few weeks is, particularly for overseas players, it's a massive risk if you're an overseas player to say, actually, no, I want to go in the ring. Because if you see someone like Elisa Healy not getting picked up, it's so dangerous for you as an overseas player to put your hat into the ring and go into the draft again. So, yeah, that's a gripe I have. I think it's kind of mad that you can be player of the match in the final and the eliminator last year and be in the lower half of the players who get paid. I don't know how you fix that other than by having a radically different system, but maybe that is something that we look at in years to come. Maybe the women's competition can have a different system.
I guess so, but then also if I were to list the overseas players just by what I see as their quality as a cricketer, even though Georgia Redmayne had that same performance at the end of the season last year, I would put her at the bottom of that list, I think.
Sure, so it's not that. It's compared to domestic players.
Yeah.
There are domestic players who have literally not played a game in 100 who are paid nearly double what she's on. There are players batters who average single figures who are earning more than her, for example.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess also you kind of just want, if you're getting these overseas players in, you kind of want them to be big names as well. Like, you know, the fact that Elisa Healy is not in the 100, she's a recognisable cricketer in women's cricket, a recognisable figure. She also, she always just offers great value as a figure to have around a competition. You kind of want to get the biggest names in it, and you almost like, in some ways, London Spirit, they've kept Georgia Redmayne because of what she did last season. Fair enough, But I think from a tournament organisation point of view, you'd rather franchises were spending big on the big overseas players as much as also you want the money to kind of stay within the English game. You kind of, it feels harsh for so much as we focused on Georgia Redmayne, but you would like it to be just like, the 24 best overseas players were in this rather than teams sort of fiddling a bit to get someone of a bit better value lower down in order to kind of get value up higher, I guess.
Cool. Moving on, sort of related to this, England announced a set of squads for their multi-format A Tour of Australia later this month. There are 21 players picked across the 3 squads. 15 of them have played for England. 4 centrally contracted players among those names: Alice Capsey, Danny Gibson, Mahika Gore and Freya Kemp, Izzy Wong, Rana, McDonald Gay and Bess Heath, who are all on development contracts, are also going. Katya, what's the standout for you? Obviously, a lot of speculation around this tour in the last couple of weeks. I think it's really good they're doing a multi-format tour, but from the list of names that we now have, what have you taken away from that?
Yeah, I guess I don't want to say there was a big build up to this A squad being announced, but there was obviously the stuff about the schedule for it wasn't really announced, and then it was kind of up in the air about when it was happening, and everyone knew it was happening. And then also because of this review going on, there was speculation about which England players would be going. And then I saw the squad announcement and I was kind of like a bit meh. I guess it's significant that both Capsey and Danny Gibson are going from the WPL when it finishes. Danny Gibson is making her WPL debut today for Gujarat. But they're 2 players who haven't really played in the WPL. As I said, this is Danny Gibson's first match. And then Alice Capsey, I think, played 1 or 2 matches at the start and hasn't played since. So perhaps that makes up for that. But they've been away for a really, really long time. So it is significant that they're then going back to Australia again. They will have been away since the first week of January, and it will be the second week of April, I think, before they go back. So that's a significant chunk of time away from home. It also kind of feel for Mahika Gore that she went out to Australia with the Ashes squad and is now doing another 24-hour flight back to Australia to be part of this A tour. But yeah, I guess the other significant thing was they haven't announced a captain for these series either. Perhaps there's something in that with the review findings yet to be announced that they don't want to name a captain of this, and then potentially maybe either announce that Heather Knight is staying on or that someone else is taking over. Don't know. But yeah, it just, there are a lot of the usual faces that there are on A tours, like Holly Armitage, Bess Heath, Emma Jones, Grace Potts, Grace Scrivens, Bryony Smith, Maddie Villiers, without there being some standout players who you think, yeah, they're really, apart from Schofield obviously, who are like, they're really on the cusp of making their England debut.
Well, that's the point, I think. Like, if you focus on T20 cricket, where you have the 100, which is one of the best competitions in the world, very few players on that list who are not the England regular. Obviously, 15 players have played for England, but loads of them only played in that Ireland series at the end of the English summer last year. So there are a few England regulars on who are going on this trip. But outside those England regulars, there aren't that many who have been banging down the door in the 100. There are some players who actually haven't even played in the 100 who are going on this trip, which, and Katya, I think you're right in terms of like Schofield is one of the few players who has done really well recently in the 100. So you can see why she is on the cusp of potentially breaking into that England first 11. But it does feel like what we've been saying for months, really, that there isn't a lot of pressure from outside the team on the players who are in it.
Yeah,
but this is an opportunity for players to do that.
It is that, but I also, because there was the spin camp, wasn't there, a few years ago, and they sent some England players on it, but almost like not the right England players. They sent some who were sort of a bit more junior, and actually, you're looking at some players who are like establishing the side and thinking like, we need to improve you quite a lot as well. I guess they've done that a little bit with with Capsey and I guess Gibson to an extent. But to be honest, looking back on that Ashes tour and going back further, someone like Amy Jones, should they actually still be like, it's tricky because, she is a senior player in terms of how much cricket she's played and how she's viewed in the team. But actually when you watch her play, you think like, well, there is still quite a lot you need to work on. And so actually putting someone like that on a development tour, it'd be a bit of maybe a hit to the ego, but also like, I think it's the kind of thing that England, and you also don't want to be blocking, the path for a younger player to be learning on these kind of tours. But I think that would have been something they could have done. And also, actually, it's a different point of view. But like, and I know we keep talking about this, maybe it's not even worth it. But I guess they have just completely moved on from Tammy Beaumont in T20 cricket. If you want to see if she is still an option as a T20 player, have her play the T20 leg of of an A tour and be like, okay, this is your chance to go and really show what you can do. And then maybe we've got, a T20 player for a couple of years there.
I suppose England would probably say that this is more of a development group rather than a strict second 11. Obviously, someone like Schofield is slightly older, but she's not played much international cricket.
So that goes more for for Beaumont, that's fair enough. But for Jones, there's reason to think she could develop basically.
No, I think it'll be really interesting to see how England go in that series. In a way, I think it makes the review more interesting if the A team get dumped as well.
But where do you go from there if the A team get dumped as well?
It's a very good question. I think it would just be another reality check of like where English cricket is at if it is a comfortable Australia A win. You'd hope, given how many players have actually fairly significant England experience, England would do pretty well. Australia have announced their squad, and I don't think there's quite as much international experience in their squad as England have it. But a huge opportunity for a lot of those players. There are loads of seamers going, for example. Huge opportunities. Kirsty Gordon's an interesting name. Mandy Villiers, who we talked about earlier, she's going. Izzy Wong's going. So yeah, plenty of opportunities for England players to put forward some serious claims for selection ahead of the summer. Next up, the PCA released a report last week highlighting the rapid recent progress in pay in the women's games. They handed out a booklet that had massive numbers, loads and loads of massive numbers. So there's a 411% increase in pay for England players in the last 5 years, a 1,488% increase in match fee pay, which I reckon if you do the numbers just speaks more about what they were being paid 5 years ago, but obviously progress, and a 538% increase in just the number of professional women's players in the last 5 years. It's huge progress, but what's next? I caught up with Kate Cross on that topic and her experience down under, where injury ruled her out of a playing role as England lost the Ashes 16-0. So something different at the moment. We've got Kate Cross on the podcast for a short chat. So we're at this PCA event, and it's about the impact that the PCA have had over the last 5 years and the growth of women's cricket. But also, we were, as media, were given this booklet showing the increases in pay, etc., over the last 5 years, and the percentage numbers are enormous. Everything's like 500%, 1,000%. And I think that sometimes it feels like the change has happened so quickly, we haven't quite realised how it's happened. Talk to us about what actually has gone on behind the scenes to ensure that the pay increases that we've seen over the last 5 years have actually happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think even me seeing those numbers, you kind of, they don't look real, do they? It's like 1,500% increase in match fees and stuff. So it is phenomenal when you get the chance to step out of it, because you're kind of just part of the whirlwind of women's cricket and riding the wave, which has been incredible. But I think a lot of it has come down to some really good conversations, and I think being quite clear as a group of players what our expectations are of being a professional athlete. And I was actually talking about it on the stage, but there's no blueprint for being a professional female cricketer, and we've almost had to create that. And it'd be very easy to just follow a men's blueprint, but actually we've seen there are issues in the men's game. So do you want to follow that kind of blueprint? So I think, having some really good conversations and having people, Emma, who's our head of she deals with the women's side of the PCA and does a lot of our negotiating with the ECB. She's been really clear about which fires we should be fighting, etc. So I think those conversations have obviously been pivotal to get us to where we are today. So yeah, it's been, even for me, who's part of the journey, has been really quite shocked by some of the figures that I've seen today.
What fires still need to be fought? There's been a lot of chat in the last week about paying the 100. There's a lot of talk about how, given that's the tournament where men and women have been on an equal footing from a publicity point of view from day one, that's the obvious place to start with equal play. That's not quite happened yet.
Yeah, I think, I don't know why the 100 conversation has come back around when obviously that headline was quite a few months ago now, but I think the disappointment with that headline was that the gender pay gap has got worse, and as a female professional anywhere in the world, not just in sport, you're trying to close that gap where possible. So I think the 100 has done some brilliant things for the women's game. I think it's done some brilliant things for cricket in England. I think the sale of the 100 now has been surpassed the expectation of what anyone thought in terms of money coming into the game. So I think that's where it was disappointing for for us as female players, but equally I know the men are disappointed with the gap between the top bracket and the second bracket now. So hopefully headlines like that won't happen again, especially from a tournament that prides itself on the parity of the tournament. So yeah, but that's the kind of thing that's still going on. It's never ending. It's always going to be conversations around females in sport, and the pay gap does come up quite a lot. I've always been one to talk more about the disparity in opportunities, which has definitely lessened now in my time as a professional cricketer. So yeah, there's still a journey to go on, but I think today is a really good example of celebrating how far we've come as a professional unit in the UK, and a lot of people, you kind of need to say thank you for that, for being the voice for us.
On some level, are you a little bit almost tired, I suppose, of having all these conversations? Like, at the end of the day, you're a professional cricketer, and like, you're supposed to be playing cricket, and you spend a lot of time fighting your corner, right? And you've had to for a long time now, and obviously there's been a lot of really amazing change, but at some level, do you actually quite like to just do cricket for a bit?
I don't think I'll get tired of it, because you are trying to make it better for the next generation. I always think about Rachel Hayhoe-Flint on days like today. She fought our corner. She was fighting for girls that probably weren't even born at that point, but she was just so desperate for cricket to be on the map and for women to have equal opportunities. So I think you'll never get tired of having those conversations, because it always comes from a good place. None of these conversations ever come from greed or people wanting more money. It's more around you want to be treated equally, and that's ultimately why we have the conversations. But I think the conversations that do get had now are to enable us to be better cricketers ultimately. I know that probably is a thing to say when we've obviously had the recent Ashes results, but ultimately that is, you want to be able to go out on the cricket pitch and be clear and not be worrying about pay gaps or the clothing that you're wearing or anything like that. So I still think those conversations will be ongoing and still be important in 20, 30 years time.
Well, you brought it up first, not me.
Yeah, I don't know why.
It's been a month or so since the Ashes ended. With a bit of time to reflect on it, how do you look back on it?
Yeah, it's been a really difficult winter, actually, personally as well as from a team point of view. And it's been a month now, but the last month has probably been one of reflection, and we've all probably disappeared off into different corners of the world now to play a bit. Well, some of the girls are obviously at the WPL, but the overriding feeling is just one of huge disappointment. We completely underperformed out there, and there wasn't one person in that dressing room who was getting on that plane to come home with anything other than disappointment. So it has been a difficult time, and I think I do stand by the fact that 16-0, as bad as that sounds, I don't think we're as bad a team as that was showcased. I know we didn't play good cricket and continuously lost key parts of a lot of games, which led to 16-0. I'm not daft, but I think there's still a lot of great talent in that dressing room. And I think now, moving forward, sometimes when you have series like that, it gives you the opportunity to step back and reflect and ultimately, hopefully, come back as a better team. So yeah, hopefully that is something that spurs us on and motivates us as a group of players to be better and represent ourselves better.
Was there something in how sort of relentless the schedule was, and that when you had those early defeats that were pretty close games, that once you were down, it's very hard to get back up in what was a very short time in Australia?
Yeah, and that's the difficulty of playing Australia in those kind of tours as well. They're a team that when they get their foot on the throat, they're not going to be willing to give you the opportunity to come back. We knew the schedule was going to be tough going into it, and this is where I found it quite difficult, because obviously I didn't play a game of cricket out there, so I can't talk about the physicality of it and what it did, but as professional cricketers now, we should be equipped to deal with that. It's different for us because we had a lot of plane journeys over there, whereas in England you're on the bus and you're obviously travelling by a different means, so you kind of don't get used to the air travel side of it. But it was relentless, and I think that's probably why it was a team that looked very tired towards the end of it, because of that relentless nature of feeling like you were getting punched every time you walked out onto the cricket field. But like I said, hopefully there is a huge positive to come of it. We never want to feel like that again. It was a horrible feeling in that dressing room at the end of that test match. So, well, it was quite horrible after quite a lot of games actually. But we're never going to want to feel that way again. So I think we'll be able to hopefully recoup and come back better for it.
And just finally, media attention, I guess, has been bigger for the last two Ashes series. 2023 was a massive positive story, the way that series played out. Obviously didn't go that way this time. How do you reflect on, I guess, the heightened media scrutiny that the women's game has for World Cups and Ashes series in particular?
I mean, on one hand, it's brilliant because it goes to show how many people care, and I have never seen as many comments on women's cricket as I did throughout this Ashes just gone. And that's testament to how the game's grown and the publicity that we get now and being visible. But on the flip side of that, we had to deal with quite a lot of scrutiny that we weren't used to dealing with. And I can remember a lot of bad Ashes series for us, but I can't remember one where we didn't win a game and it was that bad. So that's something for us to learn as a group as well, about how to deal with those moments when they are really tough. 2023 felt like a really incredible stage for us to go out and showcase ourselves on. And I think when it was that good in 2023, I know we didn't win the Ashes, but we beat Australia in 2 white ball series, which was a huge goal of ours. To then go on the complete flip side and have the series that we did in Australia, we probably weren't maybe ready for that. And yeah, the way I likened it to is it was almost like the men's team when the men go to Australia and it's really difficult and the pressure on your back, and it's all part of the international landscape now though, and something we will need to get used to, but it was a big part of it that maybe we hadn't quite taken into account when we got on the plane to go over there.
And finally, I guess, how's the body?
Yeah, better. It was a strange injury for me. It was one that I got on the plane to Australia with the ambition to play in the 3 ODIs and, well, certainly be selectable for the 3 ODIs and hopefully play in the test match, and it just wasn't to be. So that's my decision to pull out of the WPL was a hard one, but I knew that if I wanted to be the best player for England, then I needed to get back and concentrate on trying to get better and not trying to bowl 10, 15 overs a day when I was struggling a little bit. So yeah, personally it was a tough tour because I couldn't put my hand up and try and help. So I think I've done quite a lot of self-reflection as well. And I guess the worry for me is you're 33 and you pick up an injury like this and it's taken out a big chunk of my winter. So if anything, it's really motivated me as well to make sure that I'm fitter than ever and stronger than ever to cope with the demands of what the international schedule looks like now and the domestic schedule as well, because we're going to be heavily involved in that this summer. So yeah, it's been a winter of learning, but I think, like I said earlier, hopefully something that becomes a positive out of what was a fairly big negative.
Well, cheers for your time and best of luck with the new season.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That is it for today's show. Cheers for listening. We'll be back next week.